theyeshiva.net.
The portion of Balak relates that fascinating story that's recorded in Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, chapters 22 through 24, of how the prophet Balaam, who was an arch enemy of the Jewish people, was summoned by another legendary Jew hater, the king of Moab, whose name was Balak. And he summoned the prophet Balaam to curse the Israelites, the fledgling young nation of Israel. But when Balaam opens his mouth to curse the people of Israel, blessings come out instead. He tries 3 times to curse them. Each time the result is the same. The curses are substituted by extraordinary blessings. So he finally finishes off with a prophecy describing the triumph of the Jewish people at the end of days, ba'achris hayamim. You might think that since he planned to curse, the blessings that came out instead were mediocre blessings. But the truth is what blessings they are. The verses uttered by Balaam, who was attempting to curse the Jewish people, are amongst the most delicious, eloquent, exquisite, and beautiful poetry in the totality of the Tanakh. Balaam's blessings include the famous verse, Ma toivu oyhalecha Yaakov mishkaneisecha Yisrael, how good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. A verse that we, the Jewish people, came to love so much that 365 days a year, we begin our morning prayers with this verse. If you'll ask any Jew, what are the opening of the morning services, of the morning prayers every single day of the year? Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sunday through Shabbos, it's with a verse that was uttered not by a Jew, but by a non-Jew who tried to curse us, Balaam. In fact, Balaam's poetry include the most explicit references in all of Chumash to Mashiach, to the future redemption, to the ultimate Geula. So this poetry of Balaam really contains some of the most powerful messages about Jews, Judaism, and their mission in the world, which does teach you about the power of transformation. That when a curse is transformed into a blessing, it's a completely different type of blessing. It's a blessing with a different intensity and a different caliber and a different power. Today I want to focus on one verse in the poetry of Balaam. It's an enigmatic pasuk in chapter 24, Numbers 24, verse 9. Bamidbar Perik Chavdalet pasuk tes. I'll quote the original verbatim and translate. The prophet Balaam says, Kara shachav ka'ari uchalavi miyakimenu. Mevarechecha varuch va'irirecha arur. Translation. He crouches and lies like a lion, like a lioness. Kara is he crouches, kneels. Shachav is he lies. Ka'ari, like a lion. Uchalavi, like a lioness. Miyikimenu, who will dare rise him? Those who bless you are blessed, and those who curse you are cursed. What was Balaam referring to? What is the symbolism of the Jewish people described as crouching lions and lionesses? If he's just trying to convey the power, the ferocious strength, the fearsome might of the Jewish people, which is similar to a lion, an aryeh, who is described as Melech Shabachayis, the king of the animals, the king of the jungle, if that's his point, why is he describing them as crouching lions and lionesses? Kara, shachav, when they crouch, and they're lying. Obviously, he's not just referring, he could have said they're like lions, they're like lionesses. He's referring to something specific. They crouch like a lion. Kara, shachav, they lay down like a lion. So the Talmud, the Gemara in Tractate Brachas is the first tractate of the Talmud, page 12, Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara quotes one of the Talmudic sages whose name was Rabbi, the son of Zutrasi. And Rabbi, the son of Zutrasi, said something in the name of the great sage Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Zvida. You don't have to remember all the names, but I just like to quote things the way they're sourced in the original to give the full picture. And some people like to look it up. So Reb Avohu, the son of Zutrasa, said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Zvida, Bikshu likvaya Parshas Balak b'Kriyas Shema. The sages wanted to insert the whole portion of Balak into the daily reading of the Shema. Why didn't they? Mishum Toirach Tzibur. Because of the burden it would place on the community. Parshas Balak is very long, and to insert a whole new section into the daily reading of the Shema would be a heavy burden in terms of time and mental space, and therefore they refrained from doing it. Asks the Talmud, my timer, why did they want to put the portion of Balak into the daily reading of Shema? Perhaps it's because in portion of Balak there's an expression. Bilam says earlier, chapter 23, verse 22, he says, Eil moitzia mimitzrayim kesayafas re'eim loy. He describes God who takes the Jewish people out of Egypt with full pride and dignity. Maybe that's the reason they wanted to insert it in Shema. We know that there's a mitzvah to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. There's a mitzvah to remember the Exodus of Egypt every single day and every single night, which is why in the Shema we have a third section where we discuss the Exodus of Egypt. Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hoitzeisi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Perhaps since Bilam talks about God who took them out of Egypt, that's why they wanted to put it into the Shema. But the Talmud rejects that notion because there are other verses where there is mention of the Exodus of Egypt. For example, the prohibition about interest speaks about the Exodus of Egypt. The obligation to have honest weights in your store. When you weigh merchandise and you sell them, the weights should be very honest and precise and meticulous so that a customer or a client should never be deceived. Also mentions the Exodus of Egypt. Nobody ever thought of putting those portions into the Shema. So the Talmud says the reason they wanted to put this portion into the Shema, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Abin, says, is because of this verse I just quoted. Kara shachav ka'ari u'chelavi miyikimenu. He crouches and lies like a lion and lioness. Who will dare rouse him? Who will have the audacity to rouse the lion or the lioness? That's why they wanted to put it into the Shema. For this verse, comparing the Jewish people to a crouching lion or lioness. Asks the Gemara, okay, so just take this verse and insert it into the Shema. You're saying that it's a Toirach Tzibur, it's going to be a burden on the community. Just take this one verse and put it into the Shema. That won't take long. How long does it take to read this verse? A second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The Gemara says, no, we have a tradition. Kol Parsha de Paska Moshe Rabbeinu Paskinon, the Le Paska Moshe Rabbeinu Le Paskinon. We will not take a break where Moshe Rabbeinu did not take a break. In other words, to pluck out one verse from the series of verses that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote as a series is unjustified. Either you do the whole portion or you don't do any of it, because these are verses that were written by Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore they don't just pluck out one verse and put it in the Shema, and because it was so long, so therefore they decided not to do it. But this seems very strange. Why would they want this verse in the Shema? What's the connection? First we thought it's because Bilam spoke about the Exodus of Egypt. That was rejected. So what's the conclusion? That they wanted this in the Shema because of this one verse that the Jewish people crouched like a lion. What is the connection between crouching like a lion and Shema Yisrael? That they felt that every day when we say the Shema, we should include this singular verse by the prophet and sorcerer Bilam, who compared the Jewish people to a crouching lion and lioness who are lying down. There's a fascinating Medrash Rabbah in Bereshis. The Medrash Rabbah says that Bilam was referring to a particular period in Jewish history. And that's the period, to quote the Medrash, Mizman Tzidkiyahu ad Melech HaMashiach. From the days of King Tzidkiyahu, until the days of Mashiach. And what the Medrash means is, Jewish history is a cycle. If you go through Jewish history, you will see that from Avraham, the first Jew, to King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, is 15 generations. And the Medrash compares it to the 15 first days of the month. The sun is reborn at Rosh Chodesh, the new month. The sun resumes its cycle, its orbit around the earth, and it slowly waxes. Each day it becomes more and more visible. It emerges only as a sliver, and then you see it as a crescent, and this moon continues to grow and accelerate and wax until on the 15th day of the month, when you go out in the evening, if it's a clear night, you see the beautiful, wholesome moon. The moon is always a wholesome moon, but our visibility is affected by the various positions of the moon vis-a-vis the sun and the earth. But on the 15th night is the time, the Zohar says, Kaima Sia Rabah Shlomusa. The moon is wholesome. It casts its poetic and romantic glow on earth. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, was the 15th generation from Avraham. And in Jewish history, in his times, the moon, the Jews' calendar follows the cycle of the moon. Our calendar, our time, follows the lunar cycle rather than the solar cycle. The Jews are compared to the moon. We're similar to the moon. The 15th generation from Avram is Shlomo HaMelech. During his time, this moon was shining beautifully. But like the moon, after that, it begins to wane. From the 16th of the month, it becomes smaller and smaller. It wanes and wanes until, at the end of the month, it disappears. Approximately for 2 days minimum, that you will not see the moon. Even if you look at it all night, because of its position, again, vis-a-vis the sun and the earth. If you have the sun here and the moon here and the earth here, so the half of the sun half of the moon that's reflecting the sun is turned away from the earth, and therefore we can't see the half that's aglow. And after Rosh Chodesh, that's Rosh Chodesh, we call it the Moiled, the new birth, because the moon comes back to that perfect position where it's reflecting the sun and it's an about face from the earth. And then the moon starts moving further away from the sun, and with each day, with each night, as that movement and distance decreases, you get to see more and more of it. It's an interesting paradox that as the moon is closest to the sun, you don't see it. In order to be able to see the moon, it's because of the distance of the sun, of the moon from the sun, and so it continues to grow and wax and wane and so forth. If you go through the kings of the Jewish people, the first king was, of course, Shaul. Shaul was replaced by David, the father of the Davidic dynasty, Malchus Beis David. When he died, his son Shlomo, Solomon, took over. Once Shlomo died, Rechavam took over, and then the kingdom split between the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, and that's considered the next generation, day 16, when the moon slowly begins to wane. And if you go down another 15 generations, you come to the last king of Judea, whose name was Tzidkiah, or Tzidkiyahu. And Tzidkiyahu is 15 generations after Shlomo, representing the end of the month when the moon goes into when you don't see the moon disappears. What happens in the days of Tzidkiyahu? The days of Tzidkiyahu, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian emperor, destroys the first Beis HaMikdash. He exiles Tzidkiah, the last king of Judea, to Babylonia, where he is. And from that day, Malchus Beis David goes into hibernation. Literally, it never returns. Because even after the Jewish people came back and made Aliyah, with the second Beis HaMikdash being built, they were still under the authority of Persia. It's the Persian Cyrus who gave them permission to rebuild. And even though at some point they got back and then they were under Syrian Greek rule, they were under Persian rule, under Greek rule, under Syrian Greek rule, and even when the Hashmonaim had some power for a while, It was ridden with civil war and a lot of conflict. And they never yet had a Melech of Beis David from the Davidic dynasty back. It was a king from the tribe of Levi, which was a wrong decision, as the famous Ramban explains. And then Rome took over. So even in the days of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Jews were much more vulnerable and under foreign rule much of the time. And a Melech from Beis David never came back to the Jewish world. In the same fashion, Tzidkiah was the last king. It only comes back when Mashiach comes. Mashiach, of course, comes from the dynasty of Mashiach will come from the dynasty of David and Shlomo, as the Rambam says. He's Mizera David or Shlomo, Ish Beis David, from that family, the family of Malchus, of royalty. So the Medrash says, when Bilam spoke about the crouching lion, he was speaking about the period from Tzidkiyahu till the coming of Mashiach. That's the insight the Medrash gives. From the period of Tzidkiyahu, the last king of Judea, when the first temple is destroyed in the year 586 BCE, before the Common Era, Tzidkiyahu is the last king who witnesses the destruction and is exiled himself by the Babylonian emperor, Nebuchadnezzar, and he ends up in Babylonia. From that point, the lion is crouching, Kara Shachav. And it remains crouching until the kingdom comes back to Yehuda, to David, which doesn't happen during the second temple, and of course doesn't happen after the destruction of the second temple. It happens when Mashiach will come speedily. That's when the lion will not be crouching anymore. Now, this insight from the Medrash opens up a new vista to understand what Bilam was saying. He wasn't just talking about a lion and a lioness. He was talking about particularly a lion that is crouching, kara. It's kneeling, it's crouching, shachaf. It's lying on the ground. It's not standing erect. Why does the Medrash see this verse as referring to this period of Jewish history? And what is Bilam trying to say? Well, most commentators understand you have the lion in its full might, the lion or the lioness when they are standing erect, or when they are involved in a chase or in a fight, and it's pretty fearsome and scary. And then you have the lion, which is lying down and crouching, kara shachav, and so forth. But what Bilam is saying here, when we reflect on it, is something yet much deeper. And for this, we have to understand the Jewish perspective on animals that could become pets and animals that can't become pets. This generation is a generation that's obsessed with pets. Take America, for example. I know it may not apply to many people sitting in this room, but I'm talking about the larger United States of America. I don't know if you know that as a whole, American families have more pets than they have children. I once read a survey of the American Pet Product Association, APPA, and I saw there a fascinating statistic that Americans share their homes with 78.2 million dogs and 86.4 million cats. In contrast, as of 2012, there were only 73 million children in American homes. So it's 86 million cats and 78 million dogs, but only, lahavdil, 73 million children. 80. So American culture and many other cultures are obsessed with pets. But as you know, it's a fascinating idea. Now, I remember somebody where I grew up in Brooklyn, somebody once came for Shabbos, and he was very into having a dog. Having dogs, love and all that. And he shared with me, he said, it looks like you guys have something against dogs. I said, why do you say that? He says, I don't see anybody here owning a dog. I said, well, when you have homes with 11 children and 12 children, there's really plenty of excitement in the home. Your house, you have 4 items. You have a father, you have a husband, a wife, a television, and a dog. So it works. But you have 5 kids, 6 kids, 7 kids, 10 kids, sometimes 12, 13, 14, Kenai and Hurricane Yerbu. They really do not need the action and the vitality, and to avoid boredom and dullness and loneliness in the house. They crave for moments of boredom and solitariness in the house. They crave for every such moment, and it doesn't come only after decades. And whenever it comes, it's always too fast. But it has nothing to do with being against against animals. But as you know, there are pets and there are pets. The word for dog is kelev, which the Kabbalists understand as a combination of two words, kuloi lev. Kelev is a combination, the Ma'ari says, of kuloi lev, because it's man's best friend, because of it's all heart. Kuloi lev means there's a tremendous amount of connection, of emotion towards its master. That's why kelev is kuloi lev. So that's one type of a pet. But there are other pets who are not our best friends, and every once in a while, and unfortunately not infrequently, we hear in the news about such pets whose the masters thought they domesticated, and they tried to domesticate them, and it seemed promising for a while, but they were unaware of the fact that by nature, they just can't be domesticated. And we have a very interesting reflection for this in halacha, because in halacha and Jewish law, there's a distinction between what's called a tam and a muad. A tam is an animal that's domesticated that is not prone to damage. And if it does damage, the first 3 times, you can't hold the owner fully accountable, because nobody expects his sheep or his cow or his cute puppy to damage anybody, to go and attack. And therefore, the halacha is that he pays half the damage. Then after 3 times, it becomes what's called a muad. It's prone to damage. And then you're fully accountable for not guarding your animal. The question is, does this apply to all animals? So there's a Mishnah in Baba Kama, page 15. The Mishnah says that a ze'ev, an ari, a doiv, a namar, and a bardalus, and a nachash, harei elu muadin, that some animals, a wolf, a lion, a bear, a leopard, a cheetah, a snake, wolf, lion, bear, leopard, cheetah, and snake are always expected to attack. They're always prone to attack and cause damages. And therefore, an owner can say, I trained my leopard. I trained my lion. I domesticated them. They behave in such beautiful ways. I trained my cheetah. I trained my wolf. You can't. They're not domesticated. They don't lend themselves. If you have a goat or you have a sheep, here we could say you're innocent, at least for the first few times. You really didn't expect it. And that's why the halacha really changes. Now it is true, Rebbe Lezer argues, Rebbe Lezer says that even these animals could be bnei tarbus, even these animals could be cultured. There's one opinion, one Talmudic opinion by the sage Rebbe Lezer, who says that they also have the status of being a tam. In other words, we assume innocence if they have become part of human culture and civilization, in the sense that they're called bnei tarbus, that they're not expected to attack. But the law doesn't follow that view. The halacha follows the view of the majority of the sages who disagree with Rebbe Lezer. That's why in Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat, the laws of civil law, Section 389, Choshen Mishpat Siman Shin Peites, we have the halacha that there are 5 types of undomesticated animals, and by nature they are always prone to damage, and one who owns them should never expect otherwise, and therefore he or she always carries full responsibility for the damage that they might, heaven forbid, cause to another animal, say, or to another person's property, or to another person, even if they have been domesticated and, so to speak, civilized. And therefore, if they damage another animal or they kill another animal, whether it's through goring or biting or trampling or any other method, the owner is always fully responsible to pay full compensation for the damage. If they killed somebody else's animal that was worth, I don't know, whatever it was worth, obviously, if there's an emotional connection, it's harder to compensate for. We're talking here from a monetary point of view. And what are the 5? The Shulchan Aruch says in Choshen Mishpat 389, again, it's the wolf and the lion and the bear and the cheetah and the leopard and the snake. These are called mu'adin. They are always prone to damage. You remember the story that happened in Connecticut a few years ago with the chimpanzee. Was a very classic example of this of this situation. And it was a tragic story. There was this couple who took in this, they took in this chimpanzee, I think it was a few days old, and he grew up with them. He ate with them. He played on the computer with them. He fed their horses. I mean, he was mamish part of the family. And then the problem is that when chimpanzees hit puberty, they often become extremely aggressive. And despite everything, he lost it. And one day, the woman who was in charge, who, so to speak, mothered him, asked a neighbor to come help him, put him in the cage because he was so aggressive, and he attacked her, the neighbor, aggressively, and wounded her in horrific fashion. It's a miracle that she's alive. And it was a very clear demonstration that you never know. We often hear in circuses and in zoos, the tigers and the lions who attack, and somebody, God forbid, is killed or an animal is killed. And that's what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah already 2,000 years ago said that this is how the halacha views them. They are always mu'ad. You can always expect them. You can always expect them to damage, or certainly you're not sure. Now we can appreciate what Bilam was saying. The way the Jewish law looks at the lion or the lioness, we can now appreciate what Bilam is saying. Bilam is using a metaphor of a crouching lion to describe the people of Israel. So the Medrash says we're talking about the era from Tzidkiyahu until Mashiach comes. In other words, the state we call Galus, or exile of the Jewish people. When the Jewish people were exiled from their homeland, enslaved by other nations, subjected to alien cultures, and really under foreign rule. And that's why he calls it the crouching lion. But the metaphor here is extremely profound. Because when you look at exile, at Galus, it can seem that the subjugation is very real. At least from the perception of the audience watching the circus, the subjugation seems very real. And cultures have at times declared, we have at last domesticated the Jews. They finally were defeated. They finally were either defeated or integrated and assimilated into the family of nations. So Bilam is giving a prophecy. Sometimes the lion is crouching. Sometimes the lioness is laying down. But remember that even then, it's still a lion and a lioness. The lion may crouch, may lay. When you look at it, it seems docile. It seems very submissive. It seems very calm. But it's deceptive. That's only external. It's not been conquered. It's not been domesticated. It's not been subjugated. It did not surrender to anybody's authority. It remains free. It's docile, but it's docile by choice. Not by nature. It's docile because those are the circumstances the lion understands are the best circumstances for its life now. But it remains free, and it's never more than an instant away from the sudden assertion of its innate freedom. In fact, very often, if you have ever been to Kruger's National Park or to some other savannas, or have watched the videos of how these things happen, you know that before the chase, they often crouch, lay down. If you look at them, you would think they're very submissive at the time. No. In an instant, the right moment calls for it, and suddenly you realize This lion or lioness, I should say even more. The lioness is even more. The lioness is usually the one that does the chase. The lion is the one who takes the food first, but she's the one who prepares and gets the food first, and he protects the territory. It's only a moment away from the lions asserting that innate freedom and going for the chase. In other words, the lion is that animal which does not allow itself to have a human master over it. Of course, it can go to the circus. Of course, some people raise them in their homes. Of course, sometimes it's very, very successful. But the halacha says, remember, at the core, you're dealing here with the king of the jungle. And therefore, when something happens, if there's a damage, you can't say, I didn't expect it, it wasn't supposed to happen. Halacha doesn't say that. It's a mu'ad from day one. It's prone to this type of behavior from day one. No one can ever become a real boss over it. If the lion wants, the lion will allow you to be a boss over it. It may seem to have been subjugated, to have been trained, to have been harnessed, to have been domesticated, to have been confined, but it remains fiercely independent, even when it seems so confined and domesticated, and therefore, you can anticipate at any point something out of the box, a revolt, a rebellion, a suddenly breaking of the rules. Comes Bilam and says, let me explain to you the Jewish people. The Jewish people are sometimes in a state of kara, of crouching. Sometimes in a state of shachav, of lying. But it's ka'ari u'chalavi. It's like a lion and a lioness. It can be taken captive, but never owned. It can be pressured, it can be suppressed, but never defeated. We remain absolutely free in our essence. There's only one authority that the Jewish people have, and it's never a human authority. It's Hashem himself, God. It's true collectively, it's true individually, in every Jewish soul. There are times in everybody's life where you feel strong, you feel empowered, you feel mighty, you feel like a lion, or in this case I should say a lioness. You stand erect, firm, on top of the game. There may be a jungle, but you're the king of the jungle. In a word, you're in a vertical posture. Those are the moments in a person's life when you appreciate your power, your dignity, your role and your mission. But we know that at other times, our posture is horizontal. And I don't only mean physical. It's good to sleep in a horizontal way, but I'm talking emotional or psychological. Sometimes we crouch, we duck, we lay low. Sometimes we even feel depleted, weak, empty. At such moments, a person can fall prey to all types of addictions, to sadness, to despair, to depression, to strange behavior, to mediocre behavior, to immoral behavior, patterns and behaviors that undermine us. We squander our dignity, we squander our resistance, we squander our power. In our yearning for some self-affirmation, we can be used, manipulated, taken for a ride, and sometimes feel very weak. Comes Bilam, the great prophet who understands the Jewish soul, and says a moving declaration about the soul. Kara shachav chari v'chalavi miyikimenu. Crouches like a lioness, who will dare rouse him? Crouching you may be, but a lioness you always remain. Just as the lion and the lioness, even when they're crouching, when they're ducking, when they're laying low, they may seem docile, they may seem confined in a cage, but they have not lost their independent, ferocious, powerful, and free nature. It looks like the lioness has lost its touch, But that's not the case. It remains a free spirit. Nobody can ultimately impose their expectations on the lion and the lioness. Comes Bilam and says that this is what you have to understand about the power of the soul. Sometimes it's laying low. Sometimes there's a weak moment. And it could seem to the person herself or himself, indeed, at last, I have been stuffed into a cage. My freedom is gone. The game is over. I am now confined. I am now controlled. I am now under the dictates of somebody else. And that somebody else may be my own skeletons, my own ghosts, my own demons, my own trauma, my own pain, my own insecurities, my own issues and deep stuff, maybe scars and wounds from childhood, or somebody else. Look at me. My posture used to be vertical, but now it's horizontal, socially, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. Comes Bilam and says, yes, but it's a lion. A lion. It's a lioness. And a lion and a lioness are only a moment away from absolute freedom, from absolute self-determination, because inherent in their very nature is the inability to be able to really be confined. They can't. Halachically, it's expressed in the fact that if a lion or lion is damaged, you're responsible to pay full damages, even if they're your pets and favorite pets, because you were never their real boss. It's not a sheep. It's not a goat. It's not a dog. It's not a cat. It's not a bull. It's not even an ox or a cow. It's not a horse. Horses are powerful animals. But horses are, those of you who know about horses, it's a completely different creature. The horse is extremely sensitive to the master. The horse responds to the master. The horse knows what you're feeling usually better than you know what you're feeling. Horses know what their masters feel almost as well as your children know what you're feeling. They're very sensitive. They're very emotionally linked up to the person who rides them or the person who owns them. And when you're on that horse, the horse knows exactly if you're a leader or you're a victim. If you are riding the horse or the horse is riding you. And horses like to be ridden. They don't like to be the leaders. They like when there's a leader. Then they could really tune in to be real horses. They don't want the pressure of having to decide your life for you. That's a horse. A lion and a lioness are a completely different creature. So what Bilam is saying in a very positive sense is that you have to understand that at the core of your soul, you're free. At the core of the soul, there's nothing that can take you down. Even those scars and wounds that have been afflicted by circumstances, by a community, by a person, by a parent, by a sibling, by a stranger, by a relative, by a friend, by things that were done maliciously or unwillingly, things that were done, at one age or a different age, on a physical level or psychological level or other levels. It may seem to the world that I'm docile. It may seem to the world that I'm half dead. It may seem to me, but it's the perception of the people sitting in the circus. If you can tune in to the Ari, if you can tune into the Lavi, if you can tune in to who you really are at your core, you will see that there's no mood and no force and no wound and no teaching and no mantra and no narrative and no story that can usurp from you the absolute authority and freedom to reaffirm yourself as the king in the wilderness of a world, in a jungle that the lion and lioness face. Why is that? Because the Jewish soul has only one authority over it. And that authority is never a person. The Jewish soul is rooted in the infinity of God. The Pasuk says in Malachi, Ani Hashem lo shanisi, v'atem b'nei Yaakov lo chilisa. I have not changed, nothing has changed me, and therefore you, the children of Yaakov, have not perished. Nobody can destroy me, nobody can destroy you. What's the connection? Because Banim Atem Lashem Alekeichem, since the soul and the body are deeply rooted in the divine, so just like the divine is free, it's truly free. It can experience pain. Hashem experiences pain. Experience joy and happiness, but nothing can destroy it. undermine it, crush it. In that sense, the soul, when it appreciates the fact that it always remains a conduit, a channel for divine infinity, nobody else in the world, no force, not even powerful forces of nature or other people can subjugate it. We can tell ourselves that we're subjugated, and that's part of what makes us subjugated, that we tell ourselves we're subjugated. Like the line I told you a few weeks ago, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're probably right. It's the belief that I can't that causes me not to be able to. That belief is really the trap. They always give the illustration. It's a fascinating illustration about the elephants. Today they have outlawed using elephants in many circuses, and for good reason. The elephants are very, very sensitive animals, and their memories, as you know, are very powerful. And they also feel things very deeply. Elephants are not included in this list of animals because elephants are also they can get very connected to their masters in different way than lions and lionesses. And in their circuses, they often abused and exploited the elephants. But I read when they would train elephants, as the calf was born, a baby elephant that I think is called a calf, right? The calf was born, it's relatively pretty big, but it's still a small elephant calf. And they would put a little rope with a stick etched into the earth, and the calf tried to run, to move away, but it couldn't get out. So it tries 100 times, 1,000 times, but it can't do it. The fascinating thing is, 20 years pass, 30 years pass. This elephant now is a powerhouse. You do not want to get on its bad side. And it still does not escape that thin rope that it can escape with one kick. It can get the stick out of the ground and move. What's the issue? The issue is that the elephant becomes a prisoner to its own belief system. It's not a prisoner anymore to the actual facts because it's much older and much more powerful. It can lift it up and move. But because when I was a child, I tried so many times and I couldn't, so therefore today I don't even try. Not because I can't, because I believe that I can't. I'm not a prisoner to any objective rope that's tying me down. I'm a prisoner to my own belief about my inabilities. What happens so often is that when a person is young, they absorb certain messages, and now they become prisoners not to any objective facts, but to those messages. How valuable and precious it is when you can become aware of those patterns in your brain. What are the messages you're telling yourself and how they're affecting my behavior and your behavior? And then you'll see that the lioness has never died. The lioness has maybe hibernated. I know I borrowed a term from another animal. The lioness is maybe crouching. The lioness is maybe ducking. The lioness is maybe at a low point. But you're only a moment away of absolute self-expression, which is really absolute divine expression, because the ultimate self is always aligned and is a messenger of Hashem. That's why the Zohar says, the donkey could be domesticated. Chamor could be domesticated. It's not in that list. Donkeys are one of the earliest animals which have been domesticated, and you see how they allowed themselves to be used by people. Sometimes they may like it, sometimes they may not like it, but the donkey has been our great transporter of cargo, right? And Bilam wants to ride, he rides on the donkey, both for humans and for cargo. That's why the Zohar says that tshuva is b'shaita chada b'riga chada. Tshuva, return, happens in a moment. Just like the lion. What's tshuva? Tshuva means returning to your essence, returning to your core. How long does it take? A nanosecond. Not even. It's about awareness. The moment the awareness is there, I stop telling myself the story of enslavement, and I'm not enslaved anymore. This is now why they wanted to put the portion of Bilam, this verse, into Shema. There's a very interesting verse in Shir HaShirim in the Song of Songs, chapter 3. Song of Songs, chapter 3, verse 1, I read, Al mishkavi ba'leilois bikashti eis she'ahava nafshi. Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, I'm sure some of you have learned it, is that fascinating story that Shlomo HaMelech writes about the two shepherds. The shepherd, Ani ledoidi v'doidi li, I am to my beloved is to me, the shepherd who meets this young woman in the fields, and they become very, very close. The problem is that they're constantly separated again and again. Nobody wants them together. And they keep on coming back again and again and again. And the whole Shir HaShirim, much of Shirim, is this process of how he searches for him, and he searches for her, he searches for her, she searches for him. She already went to sleep, and he's pounding on the door. Open up the door, and she says, how could I? I'm already in bed. I bathed my feet. You want me to get them dirty? I can't get out of bed. I'm going to get my feet dirty. I can't open the door. That's what she says. And Doidi Shalach Yadim and Achor, right? He puts his hand through the doorknob, may I humulai, and all my kishka starts stirring from love, and I run to the door, and he's gone. Doidi Chamaklai. And it's a very powerful metaphor about the relationship between people, between Hashem and the Jew, between a soul and God. It's very, very intense, Shir HaShirim. And as Rabbi Akiva said, if the whole Tanakh is holy, Shir HaShirim is Kodesh Kadashim. It's the holiest of the holy. That's what the Mishnah says in Masechta Yadayim. The world, he says, became a worthwhile place to live in on the day when Shir HaShirim was given to the Jewish people. That's the opening Rashi in Shir HaShirim. The world became a worthwhile place the day that the Song of Songs was given to the Jewish people. This search is an incessant one. It's an extremely powerful one. And in one of the scenes that opens chapter 3, he says, Al mishkavi ba'leilos, bikashti eis she'ahava nafshi. Mishkavi is a bed. On my bed in the middle of the night, I sought the one whom my soul loves. In other words, I couldn't fall asleep. I was lying in bed, but what was I thinking about? I was thinking about the person my soul loves. What is the meaning behind this pasuk? What is the metaphor? What is the metaphor behind the verse? And one of the great interpretations by the Tzemach Tzedek and Ohr HaTorah is that Al Mishkavi Ba'leilos. He brings the verse from Balak, from Bilam, right here. Kara shachav kari mi chimeno. Sometimes a person is awake, but sometimes I'm laying low. I'm laying flat in my bed. I'm half asleep. I'm crouching. I'm in a slumber. I lack clarity. I lack dignity. I'm not living up to the full depth and majesty of the human spirit. You would think at that moment the person is really numb. So the pasuk says, no, al mishkavi ba'leilos bikashti she'ahava nafshi. I still search for my love. In the depth of my soul, I still pine for truth. I still pine for my real love. I still pine for God. I still pine for idealism, for transcendence, for spiritual emancipation. I may be crouching, but I'm still a lion. I look like a victim, but it's ultimately by choice, not by force. It's alien to my true nature. A lion can crouch, but it's not by force. It's by choice. But you say, no, but by me it's not by choice. It's been forced upon me. Now it's by choice. Right now it's by choice to propagate it, to perpetuate it. How can it be by choice? Because at my core I have not been subjugated. So if I'm being subjugated now, it's because I'm choosing to be that type of person. When the Torah says to read Shema, what are the words that are used? V'dibarta bam. B'shiftecha b'veisecha, u'b'lechtecha b'derech, u'b'shachbecha, u'v'kumecha. What does b'shachbecha u'v'kumecha mean? when you lay down and when you get up. So there's a fascinating argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in Tractate Brachos. Beis Shammai says it's talking about physical posture. Beis Hillel says it's talking about the time of the day. Beis Shammai says it's talking about physical posture. Kriya Shema at night, you have to say when you're lying down. You're not allowed to stand up. You have to lie down on the couch or on the bed and say Shema at night. In the morning, you have to stand up. In fact, the Mishnah tells that Reb Tarfon was once traveling and it was nighttime. And what did he do? He'd lie down in the forest or the wilderness to say Shema. And of course, a couple of gangsters saw this is a good victim. And they pounced on him. And he said, I was almost killed. And they told him, you deserved it because you rejected Beis Hillel for Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says it's not about posture, it's about time. B'shachbecha means the time when people go to sleep. The time when people lie down. B'komecha is the time when people rise up. Meaning the Torah is saying you have to say Shema in the morning when people stand up, and at night when people lie down. You don't have to say it when you're lying down. You say it in the time when you're lying down. B'shah shebnei adam sheichvin, b'shah shebnei adam kamen. But you could say it sitting, you could say it standing, even at night. That's why you see people daven Ma'ariv, they're saying Shema at night. Not everybody lies down in shul. Not everybody gets into a cot to say Shema at night, because the law follows Beis Hillel. If the law would follow Beis Shammai, they would have to have beds all over the shul. When it comes to Shema, which a lot of people wouldn't mind, they sleep anyway when the rabbi speaks. Right? But the rabbi sometimes ask me, what's the most important thing to have in a shul? I say comfortable chairs. People don't sleep all week. They come to the rabbi's sermon. They want to chap a nap. Give them a comfortable chair. They'll keep on coming and pay their dues comfortably because they never get such a good shlof in their house like they get in shul. In the house, it's a noise and Jacobson, but here it's comfortable. You speak for long. You're monotonous. You're boring. You're irrelevant. It's wonderful. Keep those chairs comfortable. But we follow Beis Hillel. But the question is, why would the Torah say it in such terms? To allow for the Torah could have said, say it in the morning, say it at night. No. Say it when you're laying down and saying it when you get up, because there's a deeper meaning. It's easy to read the Shema when you're up and about, when you're in a state of bikumecha, when I stand erect, when my posture is vertical, when I have risen to the full stature of my persona, when you feel upright, when you feel like a tall human being, a tall woman or a tall man. Bikumecha, that's when you could say, hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. Comes the Torah and says, sometimes you're b'shachbecha. Sometimes you just feel down. All you want to do is go to sleep. Anybody ever have that feeling? Now too, or it's early? All you want to, you're just exhausted. Life gets exhausting. It just gets exhausted. You just feel weak. You feel depleted. Sometimes it's because you've been standing on your feet for 2 days. Sometimes it's because of which sleep can solve. But sometimes there's something deeper. I just feel weak. I don't feel like lying down only because I'm tired, but I feel essentially tired. I feel depleted. I may feel dejected, melancholy. I may experience despair or some form of depression. Life gets to you. You feel feeble. You feel powerless. You feel immobilized. Those are the moments that al mishkavi baleilos. It's the middle of the night, it's dark, and I'm lying flat in my bed. Comes the pasuk and says, Bikashti sha'ava nafshi, even then I seek the one whom my soul loves. No force in the world can extinguish the flames in the soul. Mayim Rabim, says the Song of Songs. Mayim Rabim lo yuchlu lechabais es ha'ava unaharis lo yishtafua. Raging waters can't extinguish the flames of love, and multitudes of rivers can't drown them. The Song of Songs completes. If somebody says, I will pay you, I will give you all the money in the world, and you give me the love that you have, you will scorn him. It's priceless. No money can buy it. But that means also that no money can take it. No money can take it. No money can give it. It's part of the essential nature. So therefore, the Torah says, read Shema not only bekumecha, Even b'shach b'cha, I have to be able to say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What does it mean, Hashem Echad? That there's only one reality in the world, and it's called infinity. And there's no other reality. And because there's no other reality, and I'm aligned with that reality, therefore I'm always perpetually free. Submissiveness is a choice. It's never an edict. It's never a decree. It's never a coerced circumstance. And even when it does appear as one, because there are choices that we have not made for ourselves in life. There are choices that other people have made for you. Or there are choices that other people made for me. Or there are things that other people did. So what do you mean submissiveness is a choice? It's not a choice. When you were 6 years old, you did not choose it. And maybe when you were 17 years old, you did not choose that. And maybe when you were 26-year-old, you did not choose that. And even today, you're not choosing everything. Because we're conditioned already to react and just to go with the flow and so forth. That's from an external perspective. What does it mean to say Shema? To say Shema is to say, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher yitzeisi eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim. That you're never stuck in any form of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim comes from the word meitzar, boundaries, constraints. There are things that are confining me, and those things may be inside of me or outside of me, but I look around and I say, I am stuck. I have been beaten. I have been defeated. Comes Bilam and says, Kora shochav. You're crouching, you're lying. But al mishkavi ba'leilo is bikashti yeshav anavshi. Even as I lie in my bed at night, the fire, the yearning, the connection to infinity, the connection to God never ever ceases. And if I can align myself with that, if I can acknowledge that, I could say Shema Yisrael. I could say that there is oneness in my life. We say in Aleinu every day, in Aleinu 3 times a day, a very interesting line. V'kablu chulam aleim es ol malchusecha. V'simloich aleim meher lo'olam v'ad. Ki hamalchus shalchahi. It's like a whole pilpul. Everyone should accept the yoke of your kingdom. And you should rule over them forever because, it's like, I'll explain to you, God, why. Because kingship belongs to you. Okay, thank you. It's like a little awkward, right? Everyone should accept the yoke of your kingdom. And you should rule over them forever. You know why? Because it belongs to you. Okay, thank you. The person is making a very deep statement, not only to God, also to himself or to herself. Ki amalchus shalchahi. There's always a king in my life. People say, I don't believe in anything. There's no such a thing. Everybody believes in something. The question is what? Do you believe in God or do you believe in your ego? Do you believe in God or do you believe in your insecurities? Do you believe in God or do you believe in money? Do you believe in God or do you believe in fear? Everybody is afraid of something. Everybody is worshiping something. I have not met the person who worships nothing. There's no concept of a person worshiping nothing. You may worship God, you may worship the mighty dollar. You may worship God, you may worship your demons. You may worship God, you may worship your boss. You may worship God, you may worship your narcissistic, insecure ego. You may worship God or you may worship your addiction. You may worship God or you may worship your trauma and your fear. But you're worshiping something. There is something I pay allegiance to. That's the statement in Aleinu ki amalchus shalchahi. There's somebody who's a king in my life. There's somebody who's making the decisions. There's somebody who's controlling my destiny. There's somebody who's telling me, this is what you should do today, this is what you should not do today, this is what you could do today, this is what you could not do today. If I have an addiction to food, he's the king. Don't say you don't have a king. Of course you have a king. I'm at a bar mitzvah, there's a piece of cheesecake, and there's a king. And the king says, eat! And I say, Baruch Hashem, and I eat. I mentioned God, but that was just to get to the cake. Because I was trained that before you listen to the king of addiction, you got to mention God. It's like paying taxes. Next. And this one is with gambling, and this one is with drinking, and this one is with websites, and this one is with other stuff. Aleinu says, Ki ha-malchus shalchahi. Malchus, kingship in me, belongs to you. It belongs to the divine that is in me. I don't have another king. There is a king in me. There is kingship, but who does it belong to? It belongs to the divine in me. The part of me that is a reflection of God. The part of me that is infinite. The part of me that is as confident, powerful, happy, wholesome, free, uninhibited, sacred, holy as the divine itself. That is the Malchus. I may give over the power of kingship to someone else. But in Aleinu we declare a vision of a world where people will acknowledge there is Malchus, Shel Chayi. The only one who's a king in your life is the divine in you. Let the divine in you make every decision. What I do, what I don't do, what I say, what I don't say, what I think, what I don't think, how I respond, how I engage in my interactions, how I deal with situations. Let that king decide. That's the only king in your life. That's what we say 3 times. That's why Kriya Shema has to be b'shach b'cha. Even when I lay down on mishkavi b'leilas hashav nafshi. That's why they wanted in Kriya Shema to put in this verse from Bilam. Which verse? Kara shachav ka'ari uchalavi mi yikimenu. I may be crouching, I may be lying, but nonetheless, I'm still a lion. I'm still a lioness. Al mishkavi b'leilas bikashti eis sha'ahav nafshi. Somebody once sent me an anecdote that the man of the house basically returned home in a very gloomy mood. And when he comes in, he was greeted by this very fragrant smell of juicy, delicious spare ribs. But not just spare ribs, the most exquisite and expensive gourmet spare ribs. He says to the servant, to the one who ran the home, who worked for him, he was a servant, he says, listen, I lost my job today. Until I get another job, no more costly things in this house. No more spare ribs, no more fancy meat. We can't afford it. I will eat tofu and vegetables. Henceforth, cut the expenses drastically. Okay. Next evening when he returns, looking for a job, there's once again a beautiful geschmacka smell of spare ribs. He's very frustrated. He turns to the servant. He says, didn't I tell you I lost my job? Until I get another one, no more spare ribs and no more costly things. The servant says, absolutely, I understood. But this dish I didn't make for you. I made it for me. Because I didn't lose my job. I'm perfectly fine. I love my job. It's excellent around here. The Gemara says, Eved Melech, Melech. The servant of a king is a king. When a person has the courage to align themselves completely with Hashem, you become the king. You become infinite. You become uninhibited. That's why the Shema can be said b'shach b'cha. What is the Shema? Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. There is oneness in the world. When I align myself with that oneness, I become part of that oneness. That oneness is infinite. That oneness is not limited. That oneness is not inhibited. We were sitting here Lag BaOmer in one of the tents with Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin. I invited him to come Lag BaOmer. We had a farbrengen. And I asked him to speak. So I noticed that every time he's telling stories about his 8 years in prison, his introductory words were, when I found myself in a place that some people call prison. This and this happened. So I thought it was a little strange. So at one point I said, Reb Shalom Mordechai, why do you keep on saying, when I found myself in a place that some people call prison, just say when I was in prison. It's a little simpler. He looks at me like I'm crazy. He says, I wasn't in prison. I was in a place that many people call prison. I'm like, is this for real? I mean, it's fine. But like, what are you talking about? So he says, I'll explain. I'll speak about it. And he said something very profound. He said, when I went to prison, I knew I have a choice to make. Either I can be in prison and define myself as a prisoner, and now I'll be a prisoner for as long, the sentence was 27 years, for as long as they decide I'm going to be in prison. I decided to say this. I'm a servant of God. I'm a shliach of God. My neshama is a chelik elekami mal mamash. My soul is a piece of Hashem. Hashem is everywhere, but is Hashem a prisoner? So if I'm one with God, I'm connected to God, God is not in prison, I'm not in prison. As long as I'm aligned with Him, I'm not in prison. I'm in a place that people call prison. God is also in a place that people call prison. He's also here, but He's not a prisoner. God is everywhere. He's also in prison. I was sent there by God. I'm part of Him. And that's why He said, I never became a prisoner. And an interesting thing I'll tell you, maybe it's a little personal, but it's, I think, worth pointing out. Since I'm pretty close with him, even before he came out, I went to visit him a lot. I knew him in the earlier days. So a few people, the day he was liberated last year was Ois Chanukah. I got texts from a few people who said, since you're friendly with him, make sure he gets a good therapist. Because when you come out of prison, you must have therapy. People come out of prison and, there's people who commit suicide when they come out of prison. They can't handle the contrast coming back to the normal world. Actually, the first time he saw iPhones, he went crazy because no iPhones in prison. He didn't know what was happening. People were saying, can I have a selfie with you? He thought they were meshuggah. He didn't know what it is. 8 years, you're locked up. And he was really locked up. He wasn't in some camp. He was in a real prison. The old cells, the ones that you read about in the books or you've seen with your eyes. So a lot of people wrote to me personally. They said, you're friendly with him. Try to influence him to go to therapy because it's very, very important. Okay, a few days after he came out of prison, he came to visit me in my house privately, without the cameras. And he says, I have a question. You think I need therapy? A lot of people are telling me that when you come out of prison, you need therapy. You think I need therapy? I looked at him and I said, absolutely not. Everybody else needs therapy. You don't need therapy. And it was a strange thing, because a lot of people need therapy and they're not in prison. But they are in prison. That's where they need therapy. And who's not in prison? But because for 8 years he was in a place called prison, and he never allowed it to define him, he defined it. He came out as a free person because he remained a free person. Now this doesn't mean it's not painful. He was not home for Shabbos. He was away from his wife and children. I'm not saying that it's easy to be there and it's not pained. But he saw himself as an ambassador of the divine, not as a prisoner. That's a very different definition. He was in prison physically. He couldn't go home for Shabbos, but he didn't see himself as a prisoner. He saw himself as a crouching lion. At this moment, the lion was sent to crouch. Because the lion now has a mission. B'shach b'cha. But al mishkavi ba'leilos, bikashti yeshav nafshi. And he shared with me a story that happened with another Jew. There's another Jew, as you know, that you may not know, the food over there was horrible. There's two types of prisons in America. There's prisons in America where it's always prison. But there's prisons, I was once in a prison, there's basketball and there's volleyball and there's computer rooms and people. I know a guy, he has a whole company he runs from prison. And Shabbos, they have 10 types of fish. It's still tragic. It's never paradise. But that's not where Rubashkin's prison was. He was in a cell, locked down. Every movement was orchestrated. The food was horrible. It was a real prison. Real prison. And he told me there was another Jew with him over there. And there was a challenge, because they have a vending machine with some snacks, potato chips. And they had over there a chocolate snack, but it was not Chalav Yisrael. Chassidim are very, very makpid on Chalav Yisrael. I mean, every Jew is makpid on Chalav Yisrael. Chalav Yisrael is a halacha. You're only allowed to drink milk or dairy products that have been milked by a Jew, or supervised by a Jew. But some rely on a heter that in America, because it's illegal to mix in other milks, so there are many fine Jews who rely on that, and therefore they'll drink like OUD and these types of things, even if they're not Chalav Yisrael, because of different heterim. But there are many communities that they don't rely on this, and they're very, very stringent about Chalav Yisrael. Should only be milk products supervised by a Jew or milked by a Jew, and especially in the Hasidic communities. This Jew who came into prison was such a type of Jew. He only drank Chalav Yisrael his whole life. But here's a vending machine, and there's no food, and the only good chocolate bar is not Chalav Yisrael. So Reb Shalom Mordechai told me he wrote a letter to his Rav. His Rav, his rabbi. And he asked, what should he do? So the Rav said, because there are many fine Jews who rely on a heter of Reb Moshe, that in America, B'shas Atchak, Reb Moshe's heter wasn't mamash a flat heter, it was used a little bit, I think, to an extreme. But he said, B'shas Atchak, if there's nothing else, you could rely on it. So he said, since it's in prison, and you don't have Chalav Yisrael there, and you're desperate for good food, so therefore, for the time that you're in prison, you can eat and drink what's called Chalav Stam. Dairy products that are not supervised by a Jew, relying on the halachic dispensation that some very fine Jews rely on. He was excited. He was excited. Shalom Mordechai told me something very profound. He said, this rabbi thought he was doing this Jew a favor. What happened in reality is that day that he ate that chocolate bar, he became a real prisoner. He said, that rabbi thought he's helping this Jew. But the truth is, it caused him to be defeated. Because what happened at that moment was, he acknowledged that the prison had authority over him, and he compromised his spiritual values because of the prison. And he said, I told the Jew later, I said, that wasn't a help for you. That was a curse for you. The man didn't realize, obviously he was trying to help him. He was trying to make him, a little geschmack, have a nice chocolate bar. But he said something very deep, very deep. Before that, there was a certain freedom. And he said, and that's when I learned, I'm not going to compromise. Even one value I'm not going to compromise. Because the moment I do that, it means that I'm in prison. I'm not anymore with God. I'm in prison. I'm a victim. I will not lower even one standard, whatever I have to do. Why? I want to remain free. In every person's life, there are examples for this. Ki amalchus shel chahi. Where does kingship live? Who is the king in my life? I always have to ask that question. Is it my laziness? Is it my fear? Is it my ego? Is it my trauma? Is it my wounds? Is it my pain? Is it my superficiality? Is it my narcissism? Is it my depression? Is it my addiction? Who's the king of my life? And the answer that the Shema gives and the Aleinu gives is, Ki amalchus shel chahi. Kingship in your life belongs to one source and one source only. And when you know that it belongs to that one source only, you're never, ever a victim of circumstances. You were sent into those circumstances to bring divine light into that place. You're never defined by it. You're never defeated by it. You're never traumatized by it. Al mishkavi baleilos, I could be at night in bed, in a very low space, but bikashti yesh'ava nafshi. I search. I still am connected. I still search for the love of infinity, for the love of God. I read on Shabbos a book. It's called The Tattooist of Auschwitz. Anybody saw it? It's about a Jewish fellow who came from Slovakia. His name was Eisenberg. He came from Slovakia. And he was transported to Auschwitz in 1942. He lost most of his family. Most of his family was killed. And he would have died in Auschwitz like most people. 1.5 million people were gassed there. How many survivors were there? 7,000 out of 1.5 million or more. 7,000 out of 1.5. He would have died, especially in 1942. No way he could have survived so many years. It was impossible. You could count on your hand people who survived for longer than a while. What saved him? There was a fellow who took a liking to him, and he knew many languages, and he was a charming fellow, he was a good-looking fellow, and he employed him as his partner in sewing in the tattoos what the SS or the Yamach Shemam did was, when the transports would come, so those they sent to the gas chambers, most of them they sent off right away to the gas chambers. Those who remained in the labor camps and died usually a few weeks or a few months or a few days or a few hours later, either from a bullet or from hard work or from disease or from exhaustion or from hunger, starvation, dehydration, whatever the factors were, or they killed themselves, or they were killed or murdered or beaten. So they were always tattooed. They had a number. I'm sure many of you have known or know people with their numbers on their arm. So there was Jewish prisoners who would do that. They would sit, and after the selection, those who were destined to live, by Dr. Mengele Yamach Shemai, they would send them through the tattooists, and they would sew in the tattoo. It was painful. It was fast. But as one prisoner put it, that's the least of my problems here in Auschwitz, the pain of the tattoo. Because of that, he was already treated a little differently. He got his own place to sleep, and he got a little extra food, because people who did work that they really needed and wanted, they treated them a few percent better, so they should be able to survive for longer, simply so they should be more efficient. It's really one of those fascinating stories of Hashgacha. A woman, Auschwitz had a very big women's section, which was as horrific, in some ways more horrific, but it's not for now. And he would tattoo the men, he would tattoo the women. So there was one of the women who came by, was a young woman. She came from Bratislava. Bratislava used to be called Pressburg, the city of the Chassam Sofer, Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then it became Bratislava. She came from Bratislava, and he tattooed her. And he looked at her, and he felt some strong emotion. And she looked at him, and they just bonded. And he seized every opportunity to go seek her out in block 29 in the women's section to give her extra food. And he got her a better job, and he saved her life, and then she saved his life. And they both survived Auschwitz for 3 years, till 1945. But he thought she was dead. She thought he was dead. A few months after the war, they met. And they got married. And they moved to Australia. They changed their name to Sokolov. And they moved to Australia, and that's where they lived. He passed away. She passed away, I think, in 2003. I think he passed away 2006. And 3 years in Auschwitz, they maintained this secretive relationship in which you could be killed, where he saved her life, she saved his life. Whenever he can, he got her extra bread, and then he managed to get her chocolate. Because he says he learned from his house that girls like chocolate. And when he was taken to be killed, she had a friend who was being used by an SS commander for horrible things, and she got her to ask him for a favor to save her boyfriend, and he was saved. They mamish saved each other over 3 years. They meet after the war, and they get married. And I was thinking to myself that sometimes you see the power of the human spirit, the triumph of the human spirit in the darkest places. Al mishkavi baleilos. The situations that people are cast down and downtrodden in the most horrific situations. And there you see a love emerging. And the love shines with a light that is infinite, because it can't be explained by circumstances. Because if circumstances would have controlled these people, they should have been dead skeletons walking. And they were dead skeletons walking, but their souls were not dead. Viktor Frankl, who also survived Auschwitz, writes in Man's Search of Meaning, he says, it was human beings who created the gas chambers, and it was human beings who went into the gas chambers saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Describing the contrast of human beings. So Bilam says, Kara shachav kari. Sometimes you look at circumstances, the last iota of humanness should have been taken from you. There shouldn't be anything human about you. The Germans wanted the Jews to feel like rats and be like rats. Or as an Auschwitz survivor told me, if you were a rat in Auschwitz, you had much more chance of surviving. Because a lot of them had empathy for animals, even for rats. Isn't it but the magic of the soul, the magic of the human spirit, that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in the worst and lowest of circumstances, they still felt like lions, like kings. You'll take away everything, but you will not take away that last spark of love, of commitment, of dignity, of faith, of conviction. You heard of Simon Wiesenthal. Simon Wiesenthal was a famous Nazi hunter. I think he died in 2004, around 2008 or 9. He was in his 90s. He dedicated his life to find Nazis and bring them to justice. Simon Wiesenthal Center in LA. He lived in Vienna. Simon Wiesenthal, in 1990 or 1995, was honored by European rabbis. A group of European rabbis, the Committee of European Rabbis, honored Simon Wiesenthal. And at the dinner, or the banquet, they gave him a gift. What gift? A siddur, a prayer book. Wiesenthal stood up, and he said that when Bergen-Belsen was liberated, Rabbi Eliezer Silver was the chief rabbi of Cincinnati. And he came to the DP camps. He was the head of Vad Hatzalah. He was the head of Agudas HaRabbanim. He was a very well-known Rav of Cincinnati, Rabbi Eliezer Silver. He came to the DP camps, and he also came to Bergen-Belsen right after liberation. And he said he went over to me, to Mr. Wiesenthal, and he said, I want to tell you that we organized a big tefillah, a big prayer that's going to happen. Whoever wants to come to daven, say Kaddish. This is the first time in years that Jews had an opportunity to gather together and pray in freedom. Simon Wiesenthal says, I turned to Rabbi Silver and I said, never will I step foot into a shul to daven. Rabbi Eliezer Silver said, why not? And Simon Wiesenthal said, I'll tell you why. When we came into Bergen-Belsen, we discovered that there was one Jew who managed to smuggle a siddur. He could have been killed on the spot for it, tortured and killed. I was so impressed that he'd not allow the Germans to take his faith away. I was in admiration. I'm a secular Jew, but I admired him. Until I saw the next morning what happened. He rented out his siddur to prisoners to give him their portions of food. And people lined up. And they would give him a piece of their bread or their soup, if you can call it soup, or tea or coffee, if you can call it coffee or tea. It was more like mud. To be able to take the siddur and say a prayer. And he did this throughout our stay in Bergen-Belsen. And that's when I said to myself, how lowly, how disgusting to manipulate prisoners who are looking to hope. They're looking for God. And to take from them their last piece of food that they need to survive, to be able to give them the prayer book. How despicable, how inhumane. I will never, ever go to a prayer again, seeing that Jew, what he did with his prayer book. Simon Wiesenthal said the story. He said, Rabbi Eliezer Silver listened, and he said, okay. And he walks away, and he's under his lips, loud. He says about me, he says, anar. You know what anar is? A fool. What a fool this guy is. What a fool. Someone said, I was a little taken aback. Why is he calling me a fool? I understand he can call me a heretic. He can call me a secularist. Why is he calling me a fool? He triggered my curiosity. I chased after him and I said, Rabbi, why are you calling me a fool? And Rabbi Eliezer Silver said, because you're a fool, that's why. He says, why am I a fool? He says, I'll tell you why you're a fool. You know what a fool does? A fool fails to see the full picture. A fool zooms in to one little item and turns that into reality. That's what a fool does. He said, all you're looking at is this guy with the prayer book who was renting out his siddur to get food from prisoners in Bergen-Belsen. I want to ask you a question. Why don't you look at all the people who came to him and gave away their last piece of bread in these unbearable, inhumane conditions to be able to hold on to their God? Everything was taken from them. Their families, their money, their bodies, their health, their comfort. Everything was taken. Their dignity, their freedom, their liberty, their sense of humanness was taken from them. But one thing the SS could not snatch away from them. Their soul, their faith, their God, their spirit. Nobody can take that away from them. Look at them. Look at them. You're focusing on one man. What about the dozens or hundreds of people you described who were manipulated by him, who were ready to do this? What do you say about such people? That's why I called you a fool. Simon Wiesenthal said, I turned to him and I said, where's the shul? Let's go daven. So he said, the prayer book that you gave me today, you don't know how symbolic it is. You don't know how significant it is. This happened in 45. This was 55, 75, around 50 years later. A jubilee later. These were the words of Bilam. The lion and the lioness remain a lion and a lioness, even when they seem defeated, even when they seem submissive, even when they seem conquered, and even when they seem defeated. And that's why the Medrash says it refers to the state of exile from Tzidkiah till Mashiach. Because if you look at Jewish history throughout all these generations, it seems like at last the lion has been conquered, the lion has been caged. They didn't have their own country for much of their history, their own army, their own commonwealth, their own independence, subjected to the whims and decrees of evil tyrants, as I just described, the greatest of them, the Holocaust, 70, 80 years ago, Rahman al-Islam. And yet, Bilam was saying, during this time, don't underestimate who these people are. They're crouching. They're lying down. You can't recognize them in their full erect posture and stature, but you're dealing with a lioness. You're dealing with a lion. Somebody whose malchus, whose freedom, whose uninhibitedness, whose inner core could never, ever be taken from them. Even if they're in exile, they know it's because they were sent into exile. And because they were sent there, they never become exiled people. At their core, they remain a liberated people. They never develop a mentality of gullus, of subjugation, of poverty, of defeat. They were sent by God into gullus. They have a mission to do there. But at their core, they're liberated people, and that's why they knew that nobody can own their souls. Even when God sent them into gullus, He sent their bodies into gullus. But never their neshamas, never their souls. So in the worst of circumstances, and the best of circumstances, they maintained that unwavering dedication, that unwavering loyalty, which allows them at the core to always remain a free people. Have a wonderful week.
Came in 2 seconds late. We came in 2 minutes late. You had said something about a verse of Shema that was taken and put somewhere.
Yeah, the Talmud says that this verse of Balak, that they're crouching like a lion, should have been put into the Shema.
Well, that's what it was.
Yeah, they didn't because they felt it would be too much of a burden for the community. The question is, why would they want to put this into the Shema? What's the connection? They're crouching like a lion. Okay, very nice. Why does it belong in the Shema? That's what we explained, that the point of the Shema is b'shachmecha v'kumecha.
So they didn't put it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Be well.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question now?
Sure.
Okay, I listened to your monastery, and you're saying about how you know if it's a cult, and because in cults they don't want you to speak to outside community. Like we're told to not speak to missionaries, not speak to outside people, but if it's not a cult, then why not? I don't think it's a cult, but I'm just, that question came to me.
Yeah.
Is it because we don't know connections?
It's a good question. The reason I would encourage somebody not to speak to missionaries is not because I'm afraid of missionaries. It's because it's pointless. If you ever tried, I've spoken to them. It's just pointless. You're not dealing with people who are searching for integrity. There's intellectual integrity. They're open. When you're dealing with somebody who's indoctrinated, I've had in lectures, people stand up and start telling me about visions, people from Hare Krishna or Jews for Jay. It's just pointless. It's pointless. It's ineffective.
But is it not allowed to hear about it?
The Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah says that you're not allowed to read Svarim of Avodah Zarah, listen to Avodah Zarah. But it depends on the situation. In other words, there's something called Damashatosh, of know what to answer. It depends who you're putting up also. Somebody who's vulnerable, somebody who's knowledgeable. You remember Professor Emmanuel Shachat? He would have debates constantly with these guys.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.